Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you To the Moon for the Nintendo Switch. This is the kind of game that I didn't expect to beat. I had heard decent things about its story, and the Wii viewer recommended it, and you know how much I really trust most of his opinions. But then, the controls were just so darn awful that it made me want to give up after just a couple of minutes into the game. Generally speaking, when you have a game that's very story heavy, the gameplay is fairly minimalistic, and that's still the case here, but there are still more than enough scenes where you have to move your character around these top-down environments that look like they were ripped straight out of one of the SNES Final Fantasy games, and you have to interact with just the right objects to proceed through the environments. Now, the problem with this is that the characters only move in 4 directions, which I get was the standard at the time, but this game came out in 2020. And The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which had a similar art style to this, came out in 1991, yet that game allowed you to move diagonally. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Paul, that's such a nitpick. But in a game where you have to be very precise about how you walk upstairs so that you don't get stuck on the edges of the stairs, it becomes a pretty big deal, because I can't think of any other game that makes it that hard to walk up a flight of stairs. So let's get started with the premise of the game's storylines. You play as 2 doctors named Eva and Neil, and they were given permission by a dying old man to hack into his memories and make him think that he lived a life where he traveled to the moon, which he obviously wasn't able to do in his actual life. So their job is to jump through his existing memories in reverse chronological order and find a way to create a new memory where he went to the moon so that he can die living his dream. Now, this sounds like a really cool story on paper, but for one, it takes a long time to get to the actual memory leaping. Thankfully, you're watching this review, so I just skipped right to it. And second, the gameplay feels very tacked on, like the story was written first and they said, oops, we gotta make a game here. So in other words, in order to proceed through the memories, you have to find these things called memory links, or mementos. And this is basically a find a hidden object game, but just in 2D without doing a clicker. Sometimes you'll just have to click on the most innocuous object in the environment and just hope that that'll allow you to proceed. Sometimes the game just gives up on its own concept. Sometimes it just says, this conversation has enough mementos in it, so who needs to be specific? We'll just allow you to proceed because we can't think of any mementos to put on. Or, oops, this environment is too small, so there won't be any mementos here either. Overall, I just think that the gameplay involved to get between the memories just felt like an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. Now, in fairness, as you're preparing to leap between memories, you'll play a little mini-game where you'll have these tiles that form a picture, and you'll have to reverse and flip the tiles to create the full picture instead of just being a bunch of black squares and illustrated squares. Usually they have an indicator that says the fewest moves that you can do, so players who want to be perfect at this game might have an incentive to keep trying over and over again to get the ultimate combination. I personally just kept trying until I succeeded. Most of the time the puzzles weren't too hard, and I didn't ever have to reset my progress. And this was alright, but it still didn't make up for the game's clunky controls and lack of really being able to do anything specific. You can't make the characters walk faster, except in one very specific chapter where they're riding a horse. But that's the only time in the game where they walk faster than at the snail's pace that they do now. It makes me wonder, with this kind of limited graphic style, was it really that hard to program a run button? You didn't have to make it realistic. These characters are traveling through memories. They're constantly breaking the laws of reality. So if they're not going to have consistent logic in the memory world, then why can't they just go faster? Adjust one of the various settings that they keep talking about. Especially when some of the environments feel large for the sake of feeling large. In one of the earliest parts of the game, there was this humongous field that I could explore, but the field had hardly anything to do. Instead, I was relegated to maybe less than half of the map that actually did anything. And that's kind of the problem with this entire game, is that there's really long, drawn-out segments where you have to walk through a bunch of bland environments and just hope that you get the right thing. There's actually even a notebook that tells you what your objective is. But the fact that you need a notebook like this just goes to show you that a lot of these memory links just don't really make a lot of sense. You're just clicking in the hopes that you'll eventually be able to get through the story. Now, to this game's credit, the story is okay, I guess. It is nice to, after you've beaten the game and you've discovered what John's deal is, then you can rewatch the chapters and be like, oh, okay, I get what he was hinting at, because this thing happened in his childhood and that affected him as an old man, and that's pretty cool. Not only that, but one of the characters talks about neurotypicals, which is a term used for someone who doesn't have a neurological disorder. And as someone who loves talking about the autism spectrum and informing people about it, this was an intriguing subplot. However, they don't go too far into it, and a lot of the examples, well, they make sense on a basic level, but since the game is from John's perspective, you don't really get a whole lot of time to learn about how the autistic person is viewing the world. You really see it from an outsider's perspective, and I feel like if the perspective had switched, that maybe you played through the girl's memories, then I probably would have enjoyed myself a heck of a lot more. Not only that, but this game is depressing. Now, normally I don't mind that. I like playing games that have sad stories, but this game kind of feels like it goes overboard, because the two doctors are constantly joking with each other to make sure that you're not crying your eyes out at every other scene, and most of the time, the jokes just didn't do it for me. Maybe it's because the makers of this game aren't native English speakers, and so a lot of times the translation to English felt very forced. Like, the creators couldn't make up their mind whether they wanted the characters to be British or English. In some instances, they actually used an American spelling for a word in one instance and a British spelling for another. Sometimes they'd talk like trendy American teenagers, and other times they'd pull out weird British lingo. So if you want a fictional setting, at least make the language consistent. I don't know. Maybe that's not a problem in the other versions of the game, but it just felt really odd here. Now, there were a couple of instances where the characters would reference popular culture, and that was pretty fun, especially a nice little jab at Final Fantasy, but apart from that, I had a pretty miserable time playing this. I think I might have enjoyed it better if it just stuck to being a visual novel, instead of trying to shoehorn a bunch of really bland and repetitive gameplay into the narrative. Admittedly, near the end, it does pick up with a handful of interesting ideas, but a lot of them just don't play out very well. So in the end, I would encourage you to just skip this. If you really want to know what the story is, then just do a Let's Play. You're not really missing anything out in the gameplay, and in fact, I would even say the gameplay would hinder you from fully enjoying it. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section if you ended up liking this game's story. I don't know, is this the kind of game for you? Because it certainly wasn't for me. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and if you want to go to the moon, well, hope you discover if it's actually made out of cheese or not. Bye!